Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hi, it's your boy JJ. Hopefully y'all are doing good. Today we're going to be doing a deck log deck profile of a deck that I played in the BRONA tournament, and a deck that slowly but surely I'm starting to realize maybe might not be as underwhelming as I thought. So hopefully you guys enjoy this deck profile. If you do happen to like it, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment in the description below what changes you'd probably want to make to the deck, because Vanguard is a game that's based off of creativity, and I want to see how creative you guys can get with this list. So let's get started. So first things first, let's go off on the grade 3s. We go from 3 to 1 to 0. We do run 4 copies of this namesake of Seal Dragon Blockade. It's a bit different from the older version of its effect. It says, once per turn, Counterblast 1, retire all of your opponent's grade 2 rear guards, and all of your front row gets plus 10k for every grade 2 rear guard that was retired. If you cannot retire any rear guards, you get a force marker. I would recommend going Force 1 in this archetype, since its additional continuous skill is if your opponent has no grade 2s on their vanguard or rearguard circle, this unit becomes original crit 2. It gets the original crit of 2. So if you do give it a Force 2 marker, sadly enough, sure, you could probably give it to the Dauntless, but when this one gets one, it's basically a redundant feature, unless you want to mix it with some additional cards that we can talk about in a minute. So I run 4 copies of it, since it's your main finisher, it's your main alternate win condition. First things first, you probably want to ride into this card first to be able to apply pressure to your opponent to cycle through your deck. It's a pretty important piece, which is Dauntless Drive Dragon, which we run 4 copies of, since we want to try hit as much of our consistent threats as we possibly can that we want to ride on, be it either Seal Dragon Blockade or Dauntless Drive himself. So he has a skill of, at the end of battle, your drive check revealed a grade 2 or more normal units. One of your front row rear guards gets plus 10k until end of turn, which is really good, especially if you're like your boy here, who doesn't drive a whole lot of triggers, but still you want to apply a bit of pressure. You fundamentally always want to go Force 1 whenever you ride into him. If you do happen to play a Dauntless Drive build with playing, I don't know, maybe the Great, for example, you could opt to run Force 2, because that deck does get its own power on its own, so you don't need nobody to do it yourself. But if you don't, I would recommend Force 1. At the end of battle, it attacked, so it does also have an additional auto skill. At the end of battle, if your hand has 4 more cards, discard 3 cards from your hand and restand this unit. And as you can see, it loses no drive checks, so it maintains the twin drive that it has. Since you do have to discard 3 cards, we are playing a surplus of draw triggers, which can supplement this issue that we have sometimes. You do bleed through your hand a little bit, and you do sometimes have to discard some PGs here and there, some triggers, some other combo pieces you might need later in the later turns, but I think sometimes it's worth it if you really want to keep on pressuring your opponent. And then it also has an additional skill. When rolled upon, choose one of your vanguard, and it gets all of this card's auto abilities other than this ability. So you get the top 2, but you don't get the 3rd, which is nice. Which is a cool thing about this Dauntless Drive, is that if you ride on top of it, it gets all of them. It gets 2 sets of the auto skill, so you can end up restanding twice, which can oftentimes make some pretty insane combo potential. So I do like it a whole lot. So we run 4 copies of this. Then we have 4 copies of Steel Dragon Corduroy. Choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it. Your opponent looks at the top 5 cards of their deck, chooses up to 1 grade 2 unit card from among them, cause it to open rear guard circle, and shuffles their deck. Your opponent auto abilities do not activate from this call. If they did not call, you counter charge 1. So one thing about Seal Dragons, though, for some of these skills that the Seal Dragon has, it does tend to deck thin your opponent's deck a little bit, but if you're filtering their deck or forcing them to filter their deck with combo pieces they potentially need, it does make for some very sticky situations, especially if you're playing against matchups that might end up filling up their board because they might need to. So one thing I do recommend whenever you use these retirement skills from the Seal Dragon units is that you want to target the boosters as much as you possibly can to keep as much grade 2s on a board that you can, unless they're really good grade 2s you just can't let live. So that's one thing to think about. And the cool thing to note about this card too is, well, it says open rearguard circle, so if your opponent's board is gummed up, they can't really call over another rearguard to kind of deny you any of your skills and added effects. They have to call it to open, so it just gives you more targets to retire for your blockade, which is really good. I really like this card a lot. Let's run 4 copies of it. I run this over a whole lot of other options that we'll mention after this deck profile. Break Breath Dragon, it's pretty good. At the end of battle, it attacked. If your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, retire this unit. So it does not need to see a rearguard get retired. It just needs to be a rearguard retired its turn. So it's a really good skill. You get to draw a card by retiring itself. Sure. But as long as you get to attack with it, you can compensate yourself by cycling through your deck, which is really good, which does feed into the Dauntless Drive Dragon, which does allow you to discard and draw some more cards, which is really what you want to aim for. And plus, if Dauntless Drive gives this power, and it plus has an additional force marker, it can swing for 30, plus a draw at the end of it. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. When brought upon, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. If you did not retire, draw a card. So this also can be in a situation, hey, I probably might not have a grade 2. I might not have a grade 3, but I kind of want to be able to use this skill. You can opt to ride on top of itself, to retire something for your opponent. And you can end up either drawing a card or retiring a combo piece that your opponent probably might need in the following turn, or you want to deny them a skill. So there is some very niche situation that this ever comes up, but fundamentally you always want to ride your grade 3 on top of this to resolve the skill, to get your force marker, to push pressure, draw cards, and of course your opponent to guard some of your threatening boards. So you run a couple copies of that, 4 in total. Then there is Toward Cannon. Counterblast 1, put a normal unit from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck. Choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rear guards and retire it. And if your hand has 4 or less cards, draw a card. Which does happen a lot, especially with this deck. So usually, fundamentally, you want to guard very early, because the skills for Dauntless Drive and the Dauntless Drive restands and a whole lot of other cards in this deck that does make you discard some cards does put your hand to a very low hand size, and Toward Cannon is a way to at least let you trim their board and draw some cards. And the cool thing to note about this card text, and a lot of what Kagura has in general, is that you can resolve as much of the skill as possible. So you counterblast 1 and you can draw 1, which is not bad, right? It's a Berserk Dragon on van or rearguard that you want to. You could run Berserk Dragon instead of this, but I like the options of being able to just do this whenever I want to, which is really nice. Then we have now the grade 1s, which we play 14 of. I do play fundamentally a higher grade 1 count than I do my grade 2s. My grade 2s are 11, these are 14. It's fine. That's sort of what makes me feel comfortable. When this unit is placed on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle, discard a card from your hand, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, and retire it. This can retire anything of any grade, which is kind of impressive. Or you can just resolve it without effect. It's entirely up to you. And retire it. Your opponent chooses up to one grade 2 unit card from their hand and calls it to open Rearguard Circle. It needs to be unit, which is really awesome because this plays around grade 2 order cards. Then your opponent can be like, well, I'll just call this order to resolve the skill. It needs to be units, which is awesome. Calls it to open Rearguard Circle, so they can't call over a Rearguard Circle that's already occupied. Really good. Your opponent's cards' auto abilities do not activate from this call. If they do not call, you draw 2. This is a bit on the less side because it doesn't really gain any power. it is a maybe draw, but if you do it on either a Dauntless turn or a Seal Dragon Blockade turn, it does become a lot more impressive, because you can either force your opponent to say, well, hey, I'm going to deny you the draw, and we're like, okay, well, I'll just get 10k extra, I guess. Thanks. But it is on a weaker side, so use this with extreme caution whenever you use this skill, because 9 times out of 10, if your opponent is competent in playing against this kind of matchup or against this kind of card, they'll just commit the card to the board, and you'll end up getting attacked next turn by auto skills that most auto skills these days are not really on place. Most of them are at the end of battle sort of skills, so be careful with this card. Be very, very careful. Then we have 4 copies of Lava Flow Dragon, Grade 3 Searcher. Nothing more to add to that. Plus 5k if you have more rear guards than your opponent. Super basic. Then we have Dragon Knight. He shot. When placed, Counterblast 1, Subblast 1, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's back row rear guards and retire it. This sometimes can snipe some pretty interesting combo pieces your opponent might be playing around. Say, for example, your opponent says, well, okay, you forced me to call cards from my hand, then I'll call them in the back row instead of you attacking them. Then you'll be like, haha, gotcha, he shot it. And it does have the additional skill if you do ride on top of it. So if you ride into your grade 2, if you for some odd reason ride a grade 1 on top of this, you can search your top 5 for grade 3 and add it to your hand. You don't need to discard nothing else for it, and you can end up adding some of your Hill Guardians just like it. So we do have a lot of grade 3 search in this deck, which is very important for this archetype, because you want to filter through a lot of your normal units as you possibly can, and filtering through a bunch of your grade 3s is very important, and adding Heal Guardians against a lot of very potent rush decks if you're going second is really important. And then we have Flame of Hope Airmo that we run 3 copies of, because since we do go through a whole lot of Counterblast, he shot costs 1, Torrid costs 1, Corduroy costs 1, might be refunded. It's kind of half then, but sometimes your opponent is just gonna be like, well, I'll just call it, because if I'm at 3 damage, I'll take the filter, you know? And they'll be like, well, I'll just take the filter. If I hit offensive trigger, it basically ends your turn. And you could be like, well, if you choose not to, or you choose to, doesn't really matter to me. I can keep the booster, or I can trade the booster for a draw. And then that can become a combo piece. So you give your opponent a choice there. And then, of course, grade 0s, Lizard General Conroe as a starter, Heal Guardians as additional grade 3s, which is very important, because this helps this deck survive against very early aggressive matchups like Tachikaze. And then there's also 4 draw PGs. We do need to draw a whole lot, so Sentinel crits you can run at your own discretion. If you want to run them, that's fine. I do just recommend, though, still running 5 to 6 draw triggers, because your hand gets really small playing against a lot of aggressive V matchups. It gets really, really small, and you need to keep cards in your hand to guard and to attack with, which is very difficult for this archetype. So we do play 5 draw triggers, and then 1 vanilla, and then 7 crits. Because we do like to see a bit more crits than we'd like to see draws, but of course we want to see draws since we do want to run one of them. If any of my changes I would ever want to make, I'd run 1 less crit, and a couple of my grade 2s I might shift around, and we'll actually get to that in a second, where we talk about what other options you probably want to run. Okay, so now that you're still here, that you're still here, let's talk about some cards you'd probably want to run here. So there is a couple of grade 1s you'd probably want to cut for either Shot or Kerosene if you don't feel like it's that good to run for you. You could run Mem Bois, which is one of the grade 1s, I think from like extra booster set 7. It has, when it boosts, if your opponent has no rear guards, which can happen sometimes, when your opponent would call cards from his or her hand to Guardian Circle, they must call 2 or more cards at the same time. It can be okay. You can end up robbing one extra card from your opponent, but it's only for one attack, so you need to really pick your battles as to exactly which one. In some situations, when you are attacking for the first or second attack, your opponent will almost always want a PG, so you need to figure out when you think that's gonna happen. And you can have situations where your opponent probably might not care to PG almost anything you're doing, and then I'm taking some of your damage or guard you early and then taking later damage, so you need to pick your battles when you want to do that. It is an option. It is an option. You do end up clearing your opponent's board sometimes. Not all of the time, but some of the times. Then there is Burnout. So there is Dragonic Burnout. Oh, actually, there's a couple of cards here we could actually discuss as well. There is Dragonic Burnout. You can Counterblast 1, act, Rearguard Circle only. Put a grade 2 or greater card from your drop zone on the bottom of your deck. And you can choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it, no matter what the grade is, which is kind of good. So, to talk about the Torrid Cannon in comparison to this, you can run this for the sole fact. You can run Burnout for the sole fact that you can send back your heal triggers back to deck, because it says grade 2 or higher card, which is kind of nice. So you can send back your heal triggers back in, and if you end up calling a Lava Flow Dragon, you can end up shuffling your deck, which is pretty good. So you have a chance of actually healing, so you could play multiple copies of it, which is good. I do see some people, when playing this deck, do run Burning Horn, but one issue that I do have with it is that sometimes you do go through your soul really fast, and on the Rearguard Circle, it doesn't really do much, and I prefer having a card that even if I do have to discard it, that's fine to discard, and plus if I need to call it, it does something when I call it. I'd rather not top deck into this and be like, well, I guess it's kind of a beater. I'd rather, like, if I want to use my CB for something, I want to be able to use it proactively, not reactively, depending on what my opponent has on the board. And there's also Burnrise Dragon. It's a bit on the lesser end. You will only get 15k in a crit with it, but if you do happen to have your Seal Dragon turn, you can end up Seal Dragon plus Dauntless Drive / Dauntless Drive turn. You can end up getting this to 25k. Maybe 35k with a force marker, 45k with force marker, and plus bonus from extra effects. It can hit some pretty juicy numbers. So you need to kind of pick your battles when you want to pick up this card, if you're gonna ever pick it up. Let's see, what else could we talk about. Oh, and of course, not to forget to mention Bellicosity Dragon. So not forget to mention Bellicosity Dragon. When your opponent's rearguard is retired during your turn, this gets 5k. It's a beat stick. If you care about retiring, that's the only thing you want to use this for, really. It's not bad, it's just sort of like, it's very basic, very vanilla. And then there's also Berserk. There's also Berserk Dragon. That's kind of it. When it attacks Vanguard, it becomes a 13k attacker if you have more rearguards than your opponent, which is pretty good. It's for 13k base or 23 on its own. That's kind of okay. You don't have to commit an extra booster to it. And when placed, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, retire it. If it's on Vanguard Circle, you draw a card. It's okay. it's okay. It's, yeah. I prefer other cards like Torrid Cannon, for example, because you do have a whole lot of not a lot of counter charge, but you do have a bit of counter charge in here in Corduroy and Ermo. So you don't really need something like Berserk Dragon anymore for this deck. But you could run it if you feel that, I kind of want to have some early pressure and some early card draw. But I feel this deck does draw a lot. It's just getting those pieces to draw a lot is something you need to try to manage on your own which does take a lot of practice. You could end up running like 4 Airmos if you really feel that I don't like I kind of want to run less Keroses because I don't want to be dependent on them, and then you can run more Airmos, and then those cycle through your deck a whole lot more, so you can go for it that way. So with that being said, I do thank you guys for tuning in and stopping on by. If you do happen to like this deck profile, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. If you liked it, like it. If you didn't like, dislike it. I'll probably still see it anyway, due to the changes what they did to YouTube. I do appreciate the 450 subscribers that we do have today. And what did you guys think of the BRO? Let me know in the comments. Take care.